What's going on, guys? It's ETA Prime back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Snail Much 78P01. It's also known as the Much W1 or the IReadyGo Much i5. And in the last couple weeks, I've had a bunch of subscribers mention this. I guess somebody got a hold of one and did a video on it, and they saw that video and wanted to know how this thing really performed. I'm going to tell you right now, this was released in 2015. It runs Android 4.4. Now that's the update that I have here. I'm not sure if there's any kind of custom firmware for this unit. Basically what we have here is a dual SIM 3G cell phone with analog sticks, D-pad, and buttons built in. I was able to find a used one on eBay for $45, so of course I jumped on it, picked it up, and we're going to test it out. So as you can see, it does have dual analog sticks, a makeshift D-pad, A, B, X, Y, start, select, our back and home button for Android, plus we have an L1 and an R1 trigger button. There's only 2 triggers on this unit. The name Snail might be familiar to a few people because in 2019 they released the i7S, which is personally one of my favorite handhelds of 2019. Well, I say handheld, but basically it's a cell phone with analog sticks and buttons thrown on it. 4G, it does run Android 9.0, and it's powered by a Snapdragon 710, a really nice gaming/emulation device in my opinion. I did a couple videos on the i7S, so I'll leave those links in the description, but today we're looking at what I'm going to be calling the W1. It's very reminiscent of the PSP or the PS Vita, as you can see here. And overall, if I would have got one of these in 2015, this would have been the best device I ever owned. But it definitely hasn't aged well, and one of the main downsides of this is it's running Android 4.4. If anybody knows of any custom firmware with a higher version of Android, even Android 6 would work, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to flash it and see how it performs. Like I mentioned, this is known as the Much W1, the Snail Much 78P01, or the IReadyGo Much i5. There's probably some other names floating around out there. For the CPU, we have the MediaTek 6592. This is an Octa-Core CPU at 1.7 GHz. It's a 28 nanometer CPU, so it does put off some heat. The GPU is the Mali 450 MP4 at 700 MHz, 2 GB of LPDDR2 RAM. Yes, it was released in 2015. We're only working with DDR2. A 5-inch 1280 by 720 display, which still looks pretty good. 802.11 Wi-Fi, and surprisingly enough, this does pick up my 5 GHz network. We also have Bluetooth 4.0 built in, and the operating system is Android 4.4. So this was released and marketed as an Android gaming phone, but keep in mind, in 2015, we didn't have these high-end Android games like we have today. PUBG, Call of Duty Mobile, the new port of Grid Auto Sport. So overall, this will handle lower-end Android games. Minecraft, GTA San Andreas, Bully, the older versions of Asphalt run just fine on this, but if you try to run anything higher end, it's just not going to cut it. We don't have the power. But how does it handle emulation in 2020? Now this is only running a 32-bit version of Android, so we're not even going to be able to install Dolphin or the Citra emulator, and if we could, it just wouldn't run it at full speed. There's no way that these specs would handle those games. But what about some lower-end stuff? PlayStation 1, SNES, PC Engine, NeoGeo, Game Boy Advance, and even Dreamcast. Now, I got a feeling we're not going to do too hot with Dreamcast on this device, but we'll try it out anyway. So first up, we have some NeoGeo emulation using RetroArch and the Final Burn NeoCore. Everything's working great here. NeoGeo shouldn't be an issue on this device, and going into this, I didn't think it would be. This is Metal Slug 5. Next up, we have some Sega Genesis, otherwise known as Mega Drive, using RetroArch with the Pico Drive core. This is Gunstar Heroes, getting a steady frame rate here, so the lower end stuff is going to be fine. NES, SNES, as you saw NeoGeo, Final Burn Alpha stuff should run at full speed on this device. Moving over to some Game Boy Advance, still using RetroArch here with the VBA Next Core. This is Sonic Advance 3. Everything's working great here. Just taking a look at the specs of this device, I didn't think PlayStation 1 would be an issue, and for the most part it's not. Most games are going to be fully playable, but you might run into some that run around 55 to 57 without a lot of tweaking or using a different emulator. I'm using RetroArch here with the PC SX Rearm core. Looking good with Crash Bandicoot 2, but this is an easier one to run, so let's step it up a little bit with PS1. And as far as Bloody Roar 2 goes, we're not quite at a full 60 FPS. I also tried EPSXE, which is another standalone PS1 emulator, and I was running into the same issue. Every once in a while it will jump up to 60, but then it does dip down to 55. If you didn't have that FPS counter on, you probably wouldn't notice it, but I did want to put it in this video just to let you know. Dreamcast isn't going to do too well on this device. Now, one of the big issues is I can't install the Redream emulator because it's using such an old version of Android, and the standalone version of Raycast keeps crashing. I tried several versions, but I just can't get it to load correctly. So I resorted to using the Flycast core inside of RetroArch. Here we have Soul Calibur 1. I have it set to the lowest resolution, and even if we were able to hit 60 with this game, there's still a lot of graphical glitches going on, and I think it's due to the older Mali GPU. So we'll move over to a 2D Dreamcast game, and that's going to be Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Again, we're just not going to hit 60, at least with this emulator, and unfortunately Redream just won't install on here. Even if it was compatible with Android 4.4, I just don't think we would hit 60 with most of these games. I was actually pretty impressed with N64 emulation on this device. Here we have Mario Kart. It is an easier one to run, just like Super Mario 64 or Banjo-Kazooie. Those will run on the Raspberry Pi 3 pretty well. But to my surprise, even GoldenEye 007 did pretty good. Now there are devices that run this better. I do have it set to the lowest resolution here, and I'm using the standalone version of MuPin 64 Plus AE, and the main reason I went to a standalone version instead of using RetroArch was because any of the MuPin cores that I used in there would crash. They would not load with this device. And finally, we have some PSP emulation using the standalone version of PPSSPP. Overall, the 2D fighting games and the easier to emulate games like Little Big Planet will run at full speed on this device at 1x resolution with no frame skip at all. But most of the 3D PSP games that I tested with no frame skip were pretty horrible. Adding some frame skip does make some of them playable, but I personally don't like frame skip. And for the really hard to emulate ones like Killzone or God of War Chains of Olympus, there's just nothing you can do to make this unit run them at full speed. So overall, this 2015 device just isn't holding up in 2020 for regular native Android games or even emulation. Now, it does do a lot of the lower end stuff quite well, but you can pick up a $20 to $35 Android phone and do the same thing, but you don't get these built-in controls. And to tell you the truth, you're not missing out on much, especially with this D-pad. I personally do like the little analog sticks on here and the face buttons, but the D-pad definitely needed to be swapped out because it's actually really hard to use and get to. So for the viewers that asked, no, don't pick one of these up in 2020, especially for the price that these sites are still selling them for. If you can pick one up on eBay for around $35 to $40 and you know what you're getting, it could be worth it. But in the end, it's a pass for me. Really appreciate you guys watching. If you have any questions or you know of some type of custom firmware for this device that'll make it run a little better or just have a newer version of Android, let me know in the comments down below. But like always, Thanks for watching.